This is the Ripple Effect of Wellbeing in Work and Life. I'm Dr. Ken Thompson, here with Dr. Stephanie Romero.
On this show, we explore how holistic well-being practices can transform our individual lives and our collective capacity for care.
We're bringing you the science, the stories, and the specific practices that reduce stress and build resilience in our homes, our offices, and our communities.
We're talking to people to see how their perspectives, practices, and work are creating a ripple effect for a better world.
Thanks for joining us.
My next guest on the Ripple Effect podcast describes himself as a dreamer of future visions, but his feet are planted firmly in the soil of Braddock, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Fitzhugh Shaw is the executive director of the NEBRS Community Land Trust and a dedicated urban farmer. A descendant of Scottish and Chickasaw ancestors, Fitzhugh moves through the world at the intersection of food and climate justice, land healing, and, intriguingly, science fiction. Whether he is ancestor wrangling, making music, or taking a much-needed nap, his work is a testament to what it means to love the world exactly as it is, while simultaneously rewilding it for the generations to come. A practitioner in the Four Fields community and a father to humans, animals, and numberless plant people alike, he joins us today to discuss how we are dreaming the future into existence right now. Fitz, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. It's been a while, and I'm excited to just, see where you're at right now in your life and have this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to catch up with you too.
Yeah. Well, I always love to start all of my interviews with just hearing from people about how their life's journey brought them to practice. So
hmm
I would love, and I'm not even sure that I even know this about you, even though we've been
Oh,
practicing
interesting.
together for many,
Okay.
many years.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, how did you come to meditation?
There's a couple of stories that I tell myself about this. And it's funny to lead with this because I think that anyone who's been meditating for like a long enough time, you've like narrated this to yourself or friends or whomever else like enough times that there's a kind of groove you fall into. And it's just as people who watch our minds and watch our patterns, it's funny to notice that and then like try to resist it or give over to it or whatever. So one of the stories that I tell about this um, is that I was kind of raised Buddhist. My dad was and is a deeply spiritual person, probably more than almost anyone I know. And when I was little, he was an Episcopalian priest. And then, it's not really relevant to the story, but like eventually left the Anglican Church and became Orthodox Christian, and I was then raised in that church. And but he prayed with me every night at the end of the day and was very hands-on with my spiritual education. And from a very early age, maybe I was 5, he started to weave in Buddhist teaching, like explicitly, to say, this is, he would tell me, this is a religion I've been very interested in for decades, because he became interested in Buddhism when he was like 8 years old and before in the 50s. And so he began to weave those teachings in explicitly, like kind of reading from the Dhammapada and reading from the Heart Sutra and things like that, as he taught me Christianity. And when I was, as you know, uh, as a little kid, I lived in Alabama. And then as a teenager, I was in Boulder, Colorado. where the spiritual landscape is very different. Like probably could not be more different, in fact. And he started taking me to meditations, first through the Baha'i Church, which if folks don't know is a kind of universalist group. It's much more complicated than that, but for the sake of time, I'll say that. And then finally, eventually to meditations at Shambhala centers and Zen centers and other, Tibetan spaces. And so from I don't know, maybe 14 years old. I'm trying to remember how young I was. I was going pretty regularly to meditations with him. And I would be lying if I said I liked it or was good at it or anything like that. Wholly untrue. Um, kind of went because he made me. But, even just having that, there's any parents listening, like just, or other folks who encounter meditation at a young age, just having that exposure was huge. Like just being in silence for long periods, falling asleep, whatever, being grumpy, having visions, whatever it was, just being introduced to formal instruction from a really early age was pretty significant. And by the time I got to college, well, actually before college, but by the time I was in college, I was studying religion quite seriously, academically. I'm kind of following in my dad's footsteps, focused on mystical Christianity and mystical Islam. And eventually, I like to joke, just kind of like making my way east across the map. Like started with Christianity, then got really interested in Sufism, and eventually came back to Buddhism. And by the time I was 20 or 21, was studying Buddhism seriously as an academic, and realizing that I was not Christian anymore. Just kind of a slow dissolve of that identity in my life, which was painful because I was quite devout and practicing. But then wondering, well, is this other faith a home for me? And by the time I left college, felt like there was some confidence that it was, at least, you know, it was going to be something important for me. And I think, I left college, as you know, like I already had a 2-year old at that point. My wife, or wasn't then my wife, but my now wife, like, and I kind of packed all of my earthly possessions into a Honda Fit with my baby daughter and drove from New York to Pittsburgh. And that week, I looked up Still Point Zen Center, which is a well-known Zen center in Pittsburgh, and started practicing seriously. Um, and yeah, the rest is history, so to speak. I think I met you only like 2 years after that, actually, at the Shambhala Center at Pittsburgh. And the funny thing about that is the only reason I ended up, practicing with Adam Lobel and being there was that the Zazen schedule like didn't fit into my wife's schedule. Like she would be in class, and so I was watching Sawyer, like I was watching my daughter during that time, and so I couldn't go to Still Point anymore. And the only other group at that time that was offering regular meditations was the Shambhala group. Then it wasn't even a center because it was only 3 months old or something. And so yeah, started sitting there very seriously, as you're well aware, and then met you shortly after that. So a series of kind of life events and funny happenstances and commitment to what I thought the good that I knew this work could do in my life and for my family. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's a story. That's one of the versions of the story. Yeah.
that's a great story. I love it.
Yeah.
And especially thinking about the Honda Fit, which is such a tiny car.
Yeah. So I was squeezed between my daughter was still in her car seat back
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And so I was squeezed in a bunch, like between a bunch of my paintings, a bunch of art, and her, like literally making myself as small as possible because, I think my mother-in-law was in the front seat. because she had come to help. And then Zaina was driving. And so I'm sitting there and I'm just like, yesterday I was a college student and today I'm like, today's the rest of my life, which
So,
you hear that
yeah.
sometimes, but that was
Why
definitely true.
why Pittsburgh in that moment?
Oh yeah, yeah. Zaina was at Carnegie Mellon at that time.
Okay.
And so yeah, I had made a commitment like after Sawyer was born to stay in school, thankfully, and was still in Pittsburgh, and Sawyer, was born and raised here. And so yeah, it was like, as folks may know, it's like a 7 hour drive out of Manhattan to Pittsburgh. So yeah, and it was funny. A lot of people in college asked me that, like, why aren't you staying in the city? Most of my classmates stayed in New York City. And they were like, Pittsburgh, what's there? And I was like, well, my family is. Like the family that I made, not my parents.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, I didn't know. I didn't know. I know pieces of that. I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
pieces, but not the whole thing. So that's awesome. Yeah, so I know you do a lot of work in and around food justice, and I
Mhm.
wondered what is the connection for you between what we often think of this very solitary internal practice of meditation or mindfulness and
Yeah.
the like external society work that you're doing with food justice?
hmm hmm So, like a couple years after like the traditions that you and I practice in, both together and now, like kind of somewhat separately, are very outward facing, right? They're take not only because we have like our Bodhisattva vows and our kind of vows around doing good in the world. Doing good for beings, but also, the particular lineages in which we've practiced together are very outward facing, and take justice quite seriously. And when I took that like quite to heart. I was like an impressionable young 20 something, like, I guess 22 when I started practicing in that lineage. And which was good for me because I was a young dad and a householder, and that was allowed. And it wasn't only allowed, but as you know, and others may know, it was like uplifted. It was quite important in the community, and so that all felt good. But we were called to, much like many of the Christian social justice movements of this country, like called to do good in our communities. There was quite a lot of emphasis placed on that, and at the time, I was thinking about becoming a counselor, or a therapist or something like that, because I was just, very attuned to my own suffering, the suffering of people around me, suffering of folks in my communities, which were and are like largely Black and impoverished. And I remember I was working on a small community garden project with a friend and then a neighbor. I think his name was Mr. Charles. He lived across the street from me. And Mr. Charles, I was talking to him about like what I wanted to do. I was like, do you think this would be useful in our community? And he was blunt, and he doesn't know he changed my life, but he was like, yeah, but like people got to eat. Like before I can seek help for these things, I need food on my plate. Like I don't always have enough to eat. And I thought, uh, wow, that's telling. Like as someone who was raised very food insecure, it's just funny that it's not something I had considered ever doing work kind of in and around. But Mr. Chuck, he gave it to me straight. And that same summer, I encountered some mentors, some elders in our meditation community who were doing similar work, and I felt like there's no way this is a coincidence. Um, I asked them about learning to do agriculture, which is something that I had fallen in love with, working on this smaller project. And they said, well, you should do that. Like, and I said, how? How am I going to learn to do that? And they kind of spirited me through the first year of a transition into thinking about food systems and food justice. And so, like, to answer the question directly, it always felt like they were the same work. Um, and and that the as folks may, folks may connect deeply with this feeling of like when you're doing justice work, it can sometimes, to say nothing of like the exhaustion of it, like the bodily exhaustion, the spiritual exhaustion, the mental exhaustion. Like there's also this long term, like I don't know what else to call it other than like it can feel like a battle, right? It can feel like, or maybe to put it a little less aggressively, it can feel like you're swimming upstream, and that wears on you equally, if not more. And so having the formal practices of meditation were like, I mean, at points in my life and sometimes still, like a life fast. Um, there are times that I feel fairly confident I would have gone under if not for having magic in my life. Um, Particularly now, like, as things worsen dramatically, for folks across the world and for folks across our country, like I often wonder how people are surviving without connection to lineage, connection to magic, without the deep, nourishing work of meditation. Like I literally don't know. Because it's something for me that I require to continue like not I'm not saying nothing of giving up, but just like to myself go under. um yeah, but I'd love to hear from you, and if there's more I can say about that, or how for you these things have kind of co-emerged.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we have parallel but different experiences, because of, right, exactly what you're expressing about your bodhisattva vow and the teachings around creating a good and just society where people's suffering is alleviated, like that. That's what inspired me to create the nonprofit and quit my
Mhm.
job and security that I had with my job and launch out and try to support people in a very direct way. So I think we have very parallel paths, and both were inspired by, I think, the same teachings,
Yeah, yeah.
and really, really took them to heart, just really took them to heart and said, yeah, this is what we need to do. If more people
Mhm.
did this, imagine the world we'd have, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I think, you were naming how your meditation practice kind of feeds your soul. And
Mhm.
so for people that are listening, sometimes folks that listen to this podcast, I imagine, are just getting started in meditation, have a
Mm,
have
mhm.
a tentative relationship with it, or maybe they're just meditation curious.
Sure, sure.
So I guess I would love for you to talk a little bit about what your practice
Mm.
looks like and how you think, or why you think it sustains you in this work.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, like until I met you, I think I didn't really have a grasp on a lot of the other layers of like mindfulness working on us, mindfulness and meditation, like just understanding it from like a neurobiological lens or even behavioral, like all the, like you were one of the first folks to introduce that stuff to me. I was coming like, folks may have heard from the story I just told. I was coming at it from actually like a pretty explicitly religious approach to it, and was fascinated to find that it had all of these other layers of impact on us beyond like kind of those that might be more explicitly faith-based or something. So, but I can like because I was interested in therapy, and though, even folks you've worked with are have an infinite amount more experience than I have with that kind of side of it. I learned early on that, I mean, even yeah, as a very young person, that I was bringing an entire architecture of mind, of personality, thought patterns, somatic patterns to the cushion. And man, were they like not healthy, to be frank with you. You know, and not all of them, right? Not like 100% of them. I want to cut myself a little slack, but like, patterns around defensiveness, patterns around anger, patterns, even just the speed of mind, which we often hear from folks, like right off the bat. That's one of the things that people almost always report. They're just like, it's rushing, it's going, Our traditions use the phrase like monkey mind to describe that sometimes.
Or waterfall.
Yeah, right. That's just, or it's like drinking from a fire hose is maybe one of the analogies that works well there too. But absolutely, if anyone has ever been in proximity of a waterfall or been in its wake, in its kind of underneath it, it's crushing actually. And that like fairly completely and realistically describes the mind that I brought to meditation when I was younger and and still today sometimes too. So. I was always, say, blessed or cursed to be a person who was very, like self-aware of my own internal patterns. I had no brothers or sisters, so I was often kind of like left with my own mind. And meditation felt like an extension of that, like a formalized extension of that. And so, yeah, just very early on, seeing my own responses to things that might be happening in my intimate relationships, things that might be arising or emerging out of my work life was like huge step in my own maturation. Like when I met you, I was like still a young adult, and I've told people that I think including you maybe, but I've told folks that it's actually difficult for me, I should maybe say not just difficult, but impossible for me to totally differentiate between my maturation as like a person, like as an adult, my maturation as a practitioner, and then like becoming a dad over, and like a husband and all of the other roles that I feel like over the course of my 20s and 30s, like those were all happening at once. And I really feel quite fortunate to have encountered meditation when I did, because it was a buoy in that work. Like it made me better at all of that stuff. In ways that just like being in touch with friends who were my age, college friends and high school friends, and seeing differences and similarities between us as we were growing older, feeling like I feel so lucky I'm not holding a lot of the things they're holding internally, psychologically, because meditation didn't do the work for me. Like we're all aware that that's not what's happening. But it is almost a kind of fuel to burn off things at a faster rate, which sometimes, has in the past like been painful, actually, like facing those things head on. Um, but they're now facets of my mind and my life that I'm like fairly clear on. Sometimes you meet folks who, no matter their age, like still don't know those things about them, still aren't in complete or good relationship with those parts of themselves, and you can see like it's painful. Um, so that if I had to say has been those have been some of the central pillars in terms of like the actual supports and well-being that meditation has offered me and continues to offer me.
Yeah, awesome. That was helpful. The other thing that you named is lineage. And I know
Mm,
you talk about ancestor.
mhm.
So I'm just curious, yeah, like what more you might want to share about your work around your ancestry and bringing in the ancestors to the work that you do and lineage connection.
Yeah. Yeah, the schools of Buddhism that you and I, come out of, like, place a lot of emphasis on lineage of teachers, but also, not necessarily just individual people, but also a lineage of teachings and things like that. And there's a lot of weight placed on being in relationship, yes, to those historical individuals, but also their, like, writings and their teachings and practices and things like that. It's very human, like it's extremely personal, right? Um, which creates beauty and difficulty about an equal measure. And so I was, I don't know, immersed in that mind stream, in that water, for like a lot of time, um, during my 20s and 30s. And when I started to become more serious about my actual, like, blood ancestry, which I've always been in relationship to, but wasn't thinking about as a spiritual practice until my grandmother passed away, which is 12 years ago now. It was almost as though her passing out of her material life, her physical life, was like a permission for me to start really relating to her in a different way, relating to her parents and her grandparents, on and on back. Um, and I think, like, with you, I've used the phrase ancestor wrangler, which is this, like, just trying to bring some humor to the fact that we have ancestors that we actually, like, don't know what to make of, right? Like, maybe that's because parts of their life are painful to us. Maybe they created harm, like, to us directly. Maybe they created harm more generally because of white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism. They benefited directly from these things, maybe. Um, there could be all sorts of reasons that our relationships with those beings who gave us life, by whose grace we, like, actually exist, would be painful and difficult and unknown and tenuous, at best. So I like to think about it. There's kind of using the framing of, like, there's a wildness there, there's a not knowing, there's a caution there. Ultimately, with the goal of, like, being in complete relationship with those beings, so that I can heal that harm, um in my own body, in my own, like, lineage and life stream, bloodstream, but also for my daughter's sake. um if I can model something for her, like a honest, complete relationship to our history, to our family's history, I feel like that will that will be good for her. I can put it that plainly, I think. And this is something that, for me, is like that the material reality of those ancestors being, like, recognizing them in my body, and even in the way I behave. Like, sometimes there's little ticks I'll do, or little ways I'll use language or something, that I hear my Mimi, who helped raise me. And she's been gone for like 18, 19 years. And so she still lives in me in very real ways that I see in the mirror. And so reconciling myself to that history, is, like the justice work we do together, absolutely essential for me. And I can no longer imagine a mindfulness practice without it, to be honest. We used to use the phrase that you and I did, or others in our community, that you bring the entire society to the cushion because it's like it's the air you're in. And that's like no more true than the ancestors you're bringing with you, both because they're looking after you in a very real way, but also because you're probably carrying things from them you don't want to carry. And sorting through that is really important. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and I think like the repeated theme that I'm hearing in you speaking is being an honest relationship with yourself, with your own mind, with your community, with your with everything. And for
Yeah.
me, I think that's been one of the most beautiful parts of practice is having the courage and the tools and the skill set to sit with everything
Yeah.
internally,
Yeah.
externally, historically, like
Hmm.
that. If I could sum up what does practice mean for me, it's that. It's I
Yeah.
now have tools and skills and capacity
Hmm.
to hold it all.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, and I plainly couldn't have said it that succinctly. So I love this approach that's like skills, capacity, and courage. Thinking about it in that way, because those are mutually reinforcing but distinct, right? So, yeah, that's quite well put. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's just reflecting on what you are saying and how it lands for me because that's been
Mhm.
my experience too. And
Yeah.
then to like take that the next step is because you have that ability to do that and you have that courage to see everything, then you want to help alleviate the suffering that you see around you.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. I yeah, I guess I just want to name that like for folks listening, you may
Hmm.
not see yourself on this path. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like so
Absolutely.
I don't want to
Yeah.
be like and when you meditate this is going to be what happens like not everyone ends up in that path, right? And
No,
that's
I think
okay.
that, yeah, it's not only okay. The fact is that we each find our own particular way through this, and
Yeah.
that's a gift, right? Like if we were coming from traditions that forced us to like live or practice in particular ways, that would be a great harm, right? And I've found my way to these particular traditions or practices or whatever you might call them through like the karma of my life, like the very unique karma that like is just as unique for me as it would be for anyone listening. So I in no way feel like folks need to do it all the same. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm
like
grateful for that reminder.
yeah, and I think just having the courage to sit and look at your own mind
Hmm.
is an amazing transformative thing. To look at your
Yes.
own mind, feel your own feelings fully, like
Hmm.
really fully,
Hmm.
is so transformative. And like you said, helps you be a better dad, a better mom, a better partner,
Yeah.
a better human. And if even just that much, if you could start working just on that much, like perfect.
Yeah. I did one of the things I did in school was I was in the creative writing program for poetry. And it was brutal. I like thought I was a good writer before I started that program, and I think I was a pretty good writer by the time I finished. But the in between was very illuminating. And I remember I had such a sweet, very like honest and again somewhat brutal poetry one professor. But at the end of the semester, he said, "You know, uh, I know you all think I've been really hard on you, but I want to tell you that the first step you're taking it's farther than 99% of people will ever take. And so you should be very proud of yourself for embarking on the journey." And like that was the end of I never saw that person again. But like it was incredibly heartening that he left us with that affirmation. Because it is like meditation, being a writer, an artist, a parent, right, is a lifelong journey. So even beginning to do the work in a way that feels full and honest is more than most humans have ever experienced, actually. And
Yeah.
we should always feel proud of ourselves for beginning and renewing in that work.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, maybe we'll, since I can't believe how long we've been talking already. Maybe we will leave that as the last thing, but I want to ask you, one, was there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't talk about? Anything that you were
Oh,
hoping to offer that we didn't hit on?
you know us, like we could just keep going and going and
One small
meandering.
thing.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
have a
like
part two at some
there's
point.
a million things. But honestly, that like what we've discussed so far feels quite complete to me.
Good, good.
Yeah, I think the only thing that feels like maybe a doorway into a future conversation is this relationship with Earth, with place, with nature, that a lot of folks listening to this might like had there might be some familiarity with there because it dovetails so beautifully with mindfulness and meditation. Um, but that has been another like just absolutely crucial pillar of my development as a person, and as a practitioner. So yeah, if we ever get to talk again, that's probably where I'd like to start.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
I'll take you up on that. And then I love ending my episodes with any recommendations of a resource, a book, anything that you think that has supported you that you think, oh, I would love someone else to read it, listen to it, whatever that you could
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah, I wish I had had time to think about this beforehand because this is where I always my mind goes blank. But I would say like
First thought,
uh,
Fitz.
first thought. I mean, my yeah, yeah, of course. Like my first thought is the works of Robin Wall Kimmerer, which I'm sure some listeners are familiar with, but she's the author of she's Potawatomi citizen, and biologist who writes about the intersections between indigenous ways of both being with kin, like being with reality, and the intersections of those traditions and kind of modern scientific ways of understanding. And so her most recent book is The Service Berry, which is about reciprocity. It's quite incredible, and she just somehow outdoes herself with each of her subsequent works, and she's also like a frustratingly talented writer, to add on everything else she does well. So yeah, probably that. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it's been so much fun to get to know you in a little bit of a different way, and we'll definitely have to do it again. And I appreciate you taking the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time with me, for sure. It's been so good to see you.
Yeah.
Want to see you next time, like in person. So
Yeah, we'll definitely do
let's
that.
spend some time together.
Yeah.